You hear from the person who you've done it for that they've been showing it to patients and that it's had a real impact on their ability to, for example, make an informed choice about what might be a difficult medical decision. I think that's where video can really come into its own, and with sort of condensing complex information into an accessible way.
Hello there, I'm Sarah McCluskey and this is Research Adjacent. Each episode, I talk to amazing research-adjacent professionals about what they do and why it makes a difference. Keep listening to find out why we think the research-adjacent space is where the real magic happens. If you're a podcast fan, you probably already know today's guest. It's Peter Barker, host of the Research Comms podcast, which showcases great research communicators. Research Comms is one of the things that inspired me to start a podcast, so if you don't know it, pause this and go and subscribe now. I was really honoured to be a guest on the Research Comms podcast last month, but today I turn the tables and ask Peter the questions. We have a chat about how he started his career in documentary filmmaking before gradually transitioning into making animations, videos and podcasts which help to communicate research. He now runs the Orinoco Communications Agency and helps research projects with all kinds of impactful audiovisual content. He's also keen to build more of a sense of community in the research communications world. Listen on to hear Peter's story. Welcome along to the podcast, Peter. It's lovely to have you here. I wonder if we could start by inviting you to tell us a bit about what it is that you do.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, it's wonderful to be a part of it. I love the podcast. So yeah, very, very honoured to be invited on. So what I do is I own a company called Orinoco Communications, and we are a production company, a communications company, a video production agency, sort of different names for the same thing. Ultimately, we make content and advise clients on how to get their message out, and that is specifically clients from the worlds of research and innovation. So working with academic research institutes, some commercial companies that have sort of spun out from research organizations, and that's across the board. So that's science, social sciences, humanities. We cover a whole range of different subject areas, but yeah, mostly we're making videos and animations to help those clients to tell their stories and share their knowledge and share their discoveries and so on.
I can see that that's something that would definitely be in demand in the current media world. So how did you get into doing that work?
My background was in television documentaries. So after university, that was the thing that I wanted to get into, was making documentaries. I studied history at university and principally wanted to make history documentaries, but quite quickly started working in areas that I wasn't familiar with previously. I'd kind of given up science at an early age, as early as you were allowed, because it did something that I was connected to at all. I wasn't particularly good at it, I thought, at school, and wasn't engaged by it. But funnily enough, ended up working on a series of science documentaries for a couple of years for an American broadcaster, and fell in love with it then, realized that it was a shame that things had been taught in a certain way that I hadn't found engaging, because science obviously is an absolutely amazing area and some incredible stories involved and so on. So absolutely loved that, the variety. So I did history. Once I started working TV, worked on history documentaries, science documentaries, politics and so on. And I did that for about 10 years and was still enjoying the work, but started doing stuff of my own on the side. I was wanting to do a bit more filming myself. So I had been producing and directing documentaries, which meant that I wasn't filming that much myself. I wasn't editing that much myself. And those were areas that I wanted to do more of. So I started doing my own projects on the side and was doing quite a lot of food related stuff. By virtue of a friend of mine who's a food writer, and we were doing a YouTube channel together. I was just doing it kind of for fun, but to see where it went. And then an old friend of mine from university, who was a medical researcher at UCL, was watching those and said, "Hey, we've got public engagement money from Wellcome. We want to make some videos." They were researching treatments, looking to hopefully finding treatments for motor neuron disease. And they wanted to, let their patients know about what they were up to and to engage the public with the work that they were doing. And they thought video would be a good way to do it. So she got in touch. I made a series of videos for them. And then her father, also as a medical researcher up at Newcastle University, they needed some videos made. So worked on some animations for them. And then it was at that moment I suddenly realized that there's this opportunity to work in a field that I found really interesting for people who are doing really valuable work that made use of the skills that I had. And yeah, suddenly realized that there was an appetite for it, there was a need for it. And ever since then, that's what I've been doing, working on building up the company to help those kind of organizations.
It sounds like it grew quite organically then, sort of by word of mouth.
It did, yeah. I sort of had obviously the skills and the experience that allowed me to do that work, but in terms of the area that I was going into, I knew this one friend from university who was a medical researcher, but it's not a community that I was familiar with at all. I didn't really know anything about the world of public engagement as a term. Well, I wasn't familiar with it, so there was a lot of learning to do from the outset to try and embed myself within the community and to learn more about it and learn more about the needs of the research community and so on. And it was really word of mouth, me knocking on doors, letting people know what I was up to, joining different groups and getting immersed in the whole sort of SciComm world and going to science communication socials and conferences where possible and so on. So there was a lot of it was kind of slightly outside my comfort zone. Networking was never the thing that I enjoyed the most, but actually I think that was just because I always saw it as a sort of unfortunate requirement of being a freelancer in the TV world. You're always told you should be networking, and it was just kind of felt like a bit of a self-promotional marketing thing. But once I was in a world where I was fascinated by the work that was going on and felt really driven to help and felt that we were offering something worthwhile, suddenly networking actually became kind of a pleasure. And it's been wonderful to get to know all the people from the research communication community.
Oh, fantastic. I think your background's interesting. I think coming from history and science, documentary making, I imagine that storytelling comes quite naturally to you in a way that maybe it doesn't for people from a science background.
I think certainly, I've had now many years of experience of developing storytelling skills. I mean, I think it is something that can certainly be developed. I don't know that I would necessarily consider myself a sort of natural raconteur, certainly. So, I mean, I would not say it's a formula, but there are certain elements to storytelling that can be learned. There are some amazing books out there for people to read if they want to investigate it further. And I would say that there's a whole range of skills within the research community. Some scientists are fantastic storytellers, but often, they will have benefited from some training. Because, as I say, it is a skill that can be developed. It's not that if you're not born with it, you can't learn how to be a successful storyteller. But I mean, we operate as consultants, guides. We can help people to tease the stories out of the work that they're doing. And I think sometimes storytelling, when you say that you're sort of telling stories, especially when it relates to science, that can be met with mixed responses. Sometimes people feel that there's sort of a certain they're associated with fiction, I suppose, and that's sort of what science is. But really it's just about finding out what the core messages are and helping to tease those out ultimately, and focusing, I think, always on the impact rather than just on the processes themselves, on how is this going to help people, how is it going to be beneficial, who's it going to help, and if you can speak to those people as well, that's always the ideal, to hear from them how they've benefited, which is easy to do when it comes to medical research, relatively speaking, not always so easy to do with other fields of science, but it's always
sometimes the sort of recipients or the beneficiaries of the research are not always so straightforward.
No, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
You've touched on there that you're initially finding networking difficult and maybe getting your head around this new kind of science research world. Are there any other challenges that you've faced along the way?
I mean, personally, for me, I was a freelancer for so many years, working as an individual. And, all that required was trying to do as good a job as possible to get the next job that came along. It didn't require much in the way of sort of business sense. So, I mean, for me, starting a company with zero prior knowledge of how to run a business, that there was many steep learning curves involved in that, and still many to come, I'm sure. But to been doing it now for 6 years, and I feel over the past few that things have really developed. I'm very happy with how the company's going. We're growing the team. There's 3 of us now, soon to be 4, and hopefully growing further over the next couple of years. So that's been great. But challenge wise, I suppose starting out, I mean, it was just me still doing the work, and I think that because it's research and because it's generally speaking working with non-profit organizations, it took me a while to work out what, that it was okay to charge what I should be charging for the quality of work that we were doing, especially once we started growing. I had to, you need to charge in order to make it as profitable as it can be, so that you can support the team and keep the company going. And that's to everyone's benefit to do that. So there was a bit of a learning curve there. I think at the beginning, probably I was a bit apprehensive about charging too much, because these are research organizations and ultimately you want the money to be going to the research. But at the same time, I think seeing the value in what we provided, once I recognized that, what we do can help to increase the funding that they might get at the next round, or to get the funding in the first place, and how important the communication side of things is, then you start to feel confident that, you're providing value enough to be able to charge. So I would say that's probably for people who, if anybody's listening who's starting out in that world, I think it's just recognizing the value that you provide and not feeling nervous about asking to be compensated accordingly.
Appropriately. I think that's relevant even for people who are employed in these kinds of roles in research organizations. It can, it's part of the whole rationale behind this podcast, is that the research gets the focus and the researchers get the focus, and these really valuable other roles, other contributions that people are making are sometimes not recognized. And as you say, I think encouraging people to know that what they are doing is really valuable, totally. Even if it doesn't always feel like it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, once you start working with commercial companies as well, you realize it's probably easier for them to see the impact of the work you're doing in a way, because there's financial results attached. So seeing in what regard the commercial companies hold, video and general kind of whatever it is, doesn't have to be digital content, and the impact that has on their, revenue and so on. It's going to be the same for the non-profit and for the academics. It's just sometimes perhaps harder to prove that impact, depending on their purposes and their goals and so on.
Yes, joining the dots is sometimes a bit more of a challenge sometimes. So thinking now then, maybe moving on from thinking about challenges to some of the things you've done that you're really proud of, I wonder if you could tell us about a few projects that really stand out for you.
Well, I'm proud of all the work that we put out, because we do, we treat every project, as it's in its own right,
of
and
course,
always absolutely go, do our best to make it sort of stand out. But funnily enough, I was looking back at some of the early things that I did when I was literally just starting out, having just recently learned how to film, and was scrabbling around trying to do my own animations and so on. And I was quite proud later on, I suppose, now looking back, of they actually stand up pretty well considering how inexperienced I was. But they were still, relatively rough and ready compared to the stuff that we're putting out now. And I'm incredibly proud of things. I mean, now I work with animators and illustrators and film crew and so on, generally on most projects. And it's wonderful once you get to the point where you can do that, because you're, drawing on the expertise of people who just do something, one particular thing day in, day out. They're real craftspeople, and so the quality of the work that we produce now, it's easier to be proud of from that sense, just because it's thanks to their specialist skills. But I suppose it kind of falls into a couple of different categories. Sometimes I'm particularly proud of something because it sort of has pushed the boundaries creatively. One particular project springs to mind last year that we worked on was an animation for a group called Oxford VR, and they had created they develop sort of virtual reality based therapies for different kind of for mental health issues, and one of the ones they've done is a program to help people with psychosis who are suffering social isolation, and it's a guided virtual reality therapy that puts them in kind of daily scenarios that they then get accustomed to being in, so they can go out in the real world. And they've done a big clinical study and wanted a video to help promote that. And we did an animation that, I mean, it's probably easier to watch it than to describe, but yeah, I was just particularly proud of that. The approach that we took was quite time consuming. It was kind of paper cutout style and all layered, and it was quite finicky. But again, we worked with an amazing illustrator and animator and sound designer, and they were, you know, if the client comes back, and you know, it's always so satisfying if they've had such good responses from it, and it's sort of doing what it needs to do. And I would say that's the other aspect. You know, sometimes it might be quite a small scale project, but you hear from the person who you've done it for that they've been showing it to patients, and that it's had a real impact on their ability to, for example, you know, make an informed choice about what might be a difficult medical decision. And you know, I think that's where video can really come into its own, and with sort of condensing complex information into an accessible way. And how much more important can that be when you're having to make a difficult decision based on information? I think, you know, being sent a PDF with lots of text is not the same as having a 2-minute video that sort of condenses that and is presented in, you know, the tone of voice and so on that you can get through video is very different to just a sort of a block of text. So yeah, we've had some amazing feedback on some of the work that we've done and the impact it's had on patients and so on, and that is obviously makes me very proud as well.
Yeah, I think that you get an emotional connection, don't you, through either video or hearing a human voice, more than you do just from a page of text. And I think that can make the world of difference, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's funny with the, you know, I'm hearing things about voiceover artists' jobs being threatened by AI. You now have sort of AI voiceovers, which they do a pretty decent job. But for me, if I listen to it, you can just tell instantly that it's not a human, and immediately my sense of connection goes. I mean, maybe I'm just more attuned to it because I watch a lot of videos and you know, really appreciate, as I said, specialists, and that includes voiceover artists 100%. Is sort of their ability to give something a bit of nuance and that human connection. I mean, eventually maybe AI will manage it, but I think it's, you know, there's just something not quite right when you hear it. So I do, yeah, the human voice is very important still.
Yeah, I think we're not quite there with the AI yet, are we?
No.
It'd be great. Are some of those things in the public domain? Would we be able to get videos?
Yes, yeah. I'm very happy to share a number of links, and some of the other, I mean, one of the things that I'm most proud of we're working on at the moment and won't be available to the end of the year, but it's a big old animation project. But yeah, I'll certainly share a few things that we've done that kind of show, I guess, the breadth of the sort of work that we do.
Yeah, fantastic. And for anybody as well who's listening who doesn't know, I'll probably have mentioned it in the introduction, but I first came across you through the Research Communications podcast, which is one of the things that inspired me to start a podcast. So how did that come about?
That came about through, I mean, it's been going, I'm not sure when I started. It's probably longer than I remember. It's been a few years. So that came about off the back of, as I was saying, starting out in a new field, you know, moving from the TV industry where I knew lots of people to the research industry where I knew virtually nobody. I just sort of was using it as an opportunity at the beginning to kind of learn more about this world and to meet more people. So it was kind of relatively self-serving, but at the same time, I had noticed I didn't see anything else out there in terms of a podcast that was addressing that particular subject of research communication, which is, I guess, still a pretty niche area. So I thought it would be fun just to talk to people who were doing work that I was seeing that I liked, or from organizations whose work I respected, and hear about how they went about it and their experiences and the challenges they were facing. And yeah, it's been going since then, quite sporadically at times, because, you know, running a small business on my own there was enough going on to keep sort of distracting me from that. But we've just started it again, and each time I say it, we're going to be more consistent from here on in, but this time I do really mean it. We've recorded quite a lot of interviews already, and we're going to have somebody coming on board who will be specifically helping with that. So yeah, I'm loving it. I must say, I'm really just love meeting new people and having an opportunity to hear about what they're doing. So yeah.
Wow, I found a similar thing with doing this podcast, but again, it's a lot more work than you think it is, and to keep it going.
It's a lot of work, but worth it. I think, absolutely worth it. It's one of the most enjoyable things I've done, since starting in this field. And we don't make any money from it. It's done for pleasure. And now I think I've seen an opportunity, I think, based off a couple of conversations where I've had with people about, and your podcast absolutely is doing the same thing. I think sort of any opportunities to help bring the research communications community together, and give an opportunity for people to share ideas. And a couple of people that I was speaking to, Sophie McIver from the Alan Turing Institute, who I interviewed recently, she said, she comes from a publishing background. She's now the director of communications at the Alan Turing Institute, the AI Center. And she said that they're back in the public publishing world. There were loads of events that brought all the communications professionals, senior communications professionals together. And I think there's a lot of science communication events, but they're focused on science communication. They're quite broad. And I think we're looking at other ways that we might be able to help to sort of foster a sense of connection with that community. And, everyone's pulling in the same direction and has the same overall purpose. So I think if people can kind of get their heads together and talk about the challenges they face as often as possible, and the new novel ways of approaching things and exciting new ideas and so on, and just kind of getting that peer support network going would be great.
Yeah, definitely on board for that. That's one of the things behind starting the podcast as well, is try and help connect people. Because as you say, some of those communities are quite strong, like the SciComm community is quite strong, but some of the other people who are doing very similar jobs, but maybe just don't quite identify as SciComm, get a bit left out of the conversation.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, my background isn't in science, so I can kind of, sympathize with that. And I think a lot of the focus is on, well, when you hear, the government push and so on, it's often around the sort of STEM and innovation, sort of the STEM sector, and the humanities and social sciences sometimes feel like they get slightly sort of left behind. But at the same time, there's this huge focus on the importance of interdisciplinarity. And I mean, so obviously, everyone has to talk to each other and bring new ideas to the table and collaborate and so on. So.
Yeah, well, maybe some of what we've touched on there might connect to my next question, which is, if you had a magic wand and an unlimited budget, what would you change about the research communication world?
So one of the issues, I suppose, that I've come up against and still come up against quite a lot is how communications is often a bit of an afterthought. When it comes to the life cycle of a research project. And we'll often get contacted by researchers who've been given a pot of money. They were given it, at the 4 years earlier at the start of their project. And now the results come through and they've got to wrap things up, and they've got 2 months left and they want an animation, and suddenly we're brought in at the last minute. And that's fine. We'll always try and make it work. But I think for me, embedding the communication side of things as early as possible would be fantastic. And for us to know what we've got, I always love being as involved as possible with a project throughout its duration, whenever possible. You get to know the people, you get to know the goals of the project. We can give advice at the beginning about what outputs they might be able to do throughout the course of the project, rather than just waiting till the very end to say, hey, these are the findings. I think if it is, say, medical research involving the patients throughout, and then it could become a much more of a sort of two-way street, much more of a dialogue. And, video is a great way of being able to facilitate those kind of conversations. So, yeah, for me, it would be that. It would be kind of encouraging researchers. I know that the funding bodies, I think, generally speaking, do encourage it to be considered from the outset, but somehow that, understandably, the pressures of actually having to do the research itself are so phenomenally high you can understand why communication sometimes sort of gets put on the back burner for a while until things are getting wrapped up. But yeah,
I've definitely seen the difference that it can make if it's considered all the way through. So I think, again, it's that identifying what's the value of doing it. So it's sort of, the value is that if you do it all the way through, rather than waiting till the end, it'll be better. You'll get better results. You'll get better, better impact, whatever it is that you're looking for from that work.
Exactly. And then I think, it becomes a vicious circle, I suppose. If you do sort of do it in a frenzied way at the end of the project without giving it due consideration, then the chances of that piece of content or whatever it is that you're going to do of having an impact is lessened. And therefore, when they come to it next time, they're like, well, I spent that portion of the budget last time on a video, but it only got seen by 35 people. Why am I going to do that again? And it's, it can just...
Yeah, I've been involved in similar conversations where it's been, we spent all this money on this animation or whatever, but because they had no idea of where it was going, who it was for, what they were going to do with it, then that's why it didn't seem like it made much difference. So
and I mean, also I would say probably there are some animators and some production companies who people might work with who don't give much advice on what you should do with that once it's been created. We always like to give as much sort of strategic advice as we can about how to make the content have an impact, and sometimes just ask at the beginning whether or not that's even the right course of action for people to take. I mean, animation does cost a lot of money at the end of the day. If it's done well, it does. There's no two ways about it. It's very labor intensive. So it costs a lot of money. And, sometimes there might be a better way for people to spend their money. We're not going to just kind of encourage them to commission an animation from us if it's not the right way to do it. You might be better off having a sort of podcast series that has multiple episodes, or, there's so many different ways of doing it. But animations are fantastic, but it's not always the best thing for a particular piece of communication.
Yeah. Oh, well, embedding communication all the way through a research project, I think we can definitely sign up for that. Great. So to start wrapping up our conversation now, I always give my guests the opportunity to give a shout out to people that they think are doing great work in their field. Is there anybody that you would like to mention?
I mean, I would say pretty much everybody that's been on the podcast, and there's too many names to mention for that. We've had sort of 50 plus guests. So goodness. I know this is good, a sort of sitting on the fence kind of answer, but I would say that everybody who I've invited on are people who I've been impressed by the work they've been doing, whether or not it's the sort of creativity of the content that they're producing, or just the impact or the importance, the value of the work they're doing. There are many, many people. I think,
it makes it easier for me to do the podcast links if I just put go and listen to all the podcast episodes.
Well, there you go. So go and listen to the Research podcast, and you'll find dozens of people who are doing amazing work in research communication.
Excellent. So as well as signposting people to the podcast, where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
Our website would be the first port of call to see, to get a sense of what we do and some of the work we've done. I must admit, in the case of, as is the case with many, I think, communications agencies, although our website should always be fully up to date and show the most shining examples of our recent work, there's quite a lot on there that we don't have yet. So I am in the process of trying to get that updated. But www.orinococoms.com would be the place to go. And hopefully, I was living in the States for a couple of years. I'm now back in the UK, and I am hoping to get to more sort of events and conferences and so on. So hopefully there'll be an opportunity to be seeing people in person. And as I say, we've got hopes planned for putting on something ourselves, maybe towards the end of the year, to kind of fill that gap with the in-person research communications professionals kind of networking event at some point. So,
look forward to hearing about that.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, well, fingers crossed.
Okay, well, it just remains to say thank you so much for coming along and having a chat today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Research Adjacent. If you're listening in a podcast app, please check you're subscribed and then use the links under the episode to find full show notes and to follow the podcast on LinkedIn, Twitter or Instagram. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to the Research Adjacent Roundup newsletter. You can also find all the links and other episodes at www.researchadjacent.com. Research Adjacent is presented and produced by Sarah McCluskey, and you, yes you, get a big gold star for listening right to the end. See you next time.